All right, so I want to do an overview of this poker cheating scandal, and I want to weave in some analogies to famous Magic cheating scandals. That way, people understand. If you're new to this, you'll get some of the basic context. If you're not new to this, maybe you just want to understand what my current take on the level of evidence is. So you've probably seen this image over here on my screen as this thing is going viral. It went mainstream. About a week ago, there was this game at a live streamed poker room event. It's called Hustler Casino Live with the Hustler Casino in LA. This is a high stakes poker game, right? People are buying in for $500,000, $1,000,000. You see, this pot itself was $270,000 in the pot. One of the players was all in, the other one wasn't, by virtue of having a bigger stack. And then ultimately, the way the hand played out was really suspicious from the perspective of the fundamentals of the hand. Well, what do I mean by that? It was suspicious in the sense that one of the players took an action in the hand that really can't be explained using ordinary in-game logic. Now, people make mistakes. There are ways to behave. There are ways to explain behavior other than the logic of a poker hand. But within the logic of solid or even reasonable poker play, the line didn't make sense. That's the player pictured on the right, Robbie. Let me click into this. So Robbie here on the right was who we'd call a recreational player in the poker world, not somebody who makes a living from poker, but rather someone playing for fun, entertainment, whatever. We would later learn something about her financial position in the game, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But she's not a professional player, so certainly she's not expected to be taking the world's best line in every poker hand and sort of playing at an expert level. I mean, the stakes would indicate that everyone is supposed to be playing at a high level, expert level, but that's not what happens in practice. If someone doesn't care about money, they can play in any game for any stakes, any way they want. Whether this is someone who's in that position and not care about money, that's something that's up for debate still as I sit here. But theoretically, there's no reason you have to play a certain way or at a certain skill level to play in a game like this. All you have to do is buy the chips, and you're in the game. Garrett on the left, he's the opponent in the hand of Robbie. He's the opposite. He's not just a professional player, but one of the top, highest regarded players on multiple levels, both in terms of skill level, the stakes at which he plays, the professionalism with which he plays, and the reputation for honest he's sort of a known quantity in the community, stand-up guy. Now, I mean, I've been to this guy's house. I've met him. I'm not like good friends with him, but he's a friend of a friend. To the extent that's relevant, might as well disclose it. But he's got that reputation broadly. It's not like I'm not speaking out of pocket here, saying that that's his reputation. I also know somebody who's involved with the Hustler Casino live stream, just because the poker world's not that big a world. And a good friend of mine is one of the broadcasters on it. Again, I disclose it just why not, but it's not going to color anything I say really. So Garrett's the professional, Robbie is the amateur. At least that's what's going on the surface. Garrett plays his hand 8-7 suited, standard stuff. Robbie makes it a little bit of an unorthodox play by taking the hand Jack-4 offsuit to the flop, facing a raise. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow in and of itself, but also probably not a professional play and not something that you want to really be doing when you're facing stronger opposition. It's a really dangerous play, but it is what it is. Flop comes 10-10-9 with two clubs, giving Garrett a big draw on a scary board. But big draw also is a board that a lot of people will bluff at. So that sort of cuts both ways. It's possible to have very strong hands on this board, but it's more likely to have a hand like the one he has or a different hand that draws. Robbie doesn't have much of anything but calls a flop bet. On the turn is when things get interesting. The turn is a brick, a 3 of hearts. It does put a heart flush out there, a heart flush draw out there in addition to the club flush draw. And so Garrett bets. Robbie now decides to raise the minimum, meaning just double the bet that was put out there, and does this with nothing. No draw, no made hand, jack high. Can't really beat much of anything. But that raise doesn't mean she's trying to beat anything. She just sort of signals that, hey, maybe there's a lot of draws out there. Garrett is going to bet with a lot of hands that are very weak that can't necessarily withstand a bunch of pressure. So we'll start that pressure with a minimum raise. The minimum raise itself has been the subject of some debate. How standard is that sizing for a recreational player? How much, that's not really the critical part of the hand, but some people put some weight on that as far as one more thing that sort of seems a little bit off about how a recreational player is playing. The title. Yeah. Well, sure. Yeah, the title's wrong. I guess I'll update that later, whatever. For those just joining, I'm just giving an overview of how we got here. So what happens next is where the interesting stuff happens. So Garrett decides to move all in, sensing weakness, believing that this recreational player is not going to be raising the minimum with many strong hands, but it's going to be mostly doing it with a bluff, and decides to raise a large amount, sort of so that, okay, if this opponent has a fairly compelling hand that he's losing to, such as like an ace-high club flush draw, well, he's going to bet enough to try to take it down anyway, even through those more powerful draws. That's what he decides to do. And again, that's not who cares. He's sort of taking that line as a professional player. That's not the interesting part either necessarily. When things get really interesting is that Robbie takes her time, sits there, hems and haws a little bit, and decides to call. So the reason that calling is interesting, because it's for those of you who are relatively new to poker, calling with a hand as weak as Jack High is interesting because when you are calling, the winner of the hand is not going to be determined by a fold or call decision. It's going to be determined by who has a stronger hand at the end. Once you make a call for all your chips, you are saying this hand will go to the showdown and whoever has the strongest hand will win. And Jack High is almost never going to be the strongest hand at the end of the hand. That's what's so weird about this play. That's what got everyone's sort of jaw onto the floor when this hand happened, was that Jack High really only beats a hand like 8-7 suited. Now, of course, in the hand, I mean, she does have the better hand, even though some folks said, well, the percentages said he was 53% to win the hand. I mean, that's part of it too, but she doesn't know that, but also that involves some dead card math, and those aren't the pot odds. For those of you who are advanced, like that'll make sense. For the rest of you, it's just a very strange decision that can't really be justified on a fundamentals of poker basis. Not only can it not be justified at like an expert level play, it can't even be justified on a recreational ABC, I know how to play, I'm playing at these stakes as a recreational player. It can't really be justified on that level anyway. Something had to have gone wrong here in terms of the strategy being very off of what proper strategy would be, or the strategy is so next level that it's like, a wizard level read, which nobody, I don't think, can fairly expect that from even a professional player, let alone a recreational player. Or something even more crazy going on regarding cheating potentially, because these streamed games, let's talk about how that could possibly happen. There's been cheating before on these streamed poker games. There's technology in the stream that allows these hole cards to be viewed using RFID technology. And that's not the really important part. The important part is that there's a video broadcast here. There's a production that's going on where the actual cards in hand are being captured as part of the video feed. Now they're being displayed to the fans at home on a delay. So it's not like you can be at home texting Robbie or whatever, because it's not being, but of course the poker stream crew can see it in real time. Let's say you had to adjust a camera angle or something, you couldn't go back in time and do it. You have to have a live feed of what's going on, and then you put that on a delay for the broadcast. But somebody here at poker, at Heist, at the Hustler Casino Live has access to this. Now, whether they did something improper with that access to information, nobody knows. That's what the drama is about. But folks have access to, and in the past, there was a famous cheating scandal with Mike Postle, where it was essentially proven, although not proven, it was essentially proven beyond what I would describe as a reasonable suspicion otherwise, that this individual was cheating, using this same thing where he had access to what the players held by virtue of what was going on in the technology of the broadcast. So immediately people said, well, that's got to be what's going on here. Now, there were a bunch of reasons why. Yeah, okay, I guess I got to fix the stream title. Stream information. Okay, I'll fix it. Poker cheating scandal explained to Magic players. All right, done. Update. Hopefully that updated it. Yeah. Stream info. This is definitely not me playing the League Weekend, which doesn't even exist anymore. Okay, so for those just tuning in, we're going over this hand and why it's so fishy to somebody who doesn't understand the poker dynamics necessarily. So let's make a Magic analogy then. Let's do that. This is sort of like, this is on the level of a player would let's say in a high stakes match where you had no idea what was in your opponent's deck and anything could be in their deck, any card, and there's no reason to think that they had a card that gave themselves hexproof. This would be like if someone lightning bolted a creature instead of the opponent when their opponent was at 3, but the opponent had an instant that gave them hexproof, or like an Angel's Grace that saved them from dying. Where you'd look at it and you go like, without knowing what's in the deck at all, there's no way this is the right play, even though in the situation it happens to be the right play. So we're not saying it's not the right play or it's a fishy suspect play because it's wrong. I mean, in the game, in the actual game, based on actual hands and hidden information, it's right. It's the correct play. You do want to bolt the creature. You got to get rid of that creature so you can survive because the opponent has the Angel's Grace. You can't bolt the face. But in real life, nobody would play that way who knows what they're doing. You would always just bolt the opponent's face. Now, you can also make a mistake. It's happened to me in the last month that somebody bolted my creature while I was at 3. Swear to God, as I sit here, I was playing Scapeshift. I had a Dryad out. I was at 6. They had 2 lightning bolts. They bolted the Dryad twice instead of me twice. It made no sense, but it still happened because people make mistakes that don't make sense by the logic of proper game strategy. So that's certainly possible here. It's possible Robbie simply did that. She made a play that just didn't make sense, and you can stare at it all day and talk about it all day. It's not gonna make sense, but that's okay. Players make mistakes, and a recreational player makes those mistakes way more often than a professional player. And like I said, I've seen it in Magic. It happened to me 2 weeks ago. Somebody bolted my creature while I was at 3. It made no sense. But this situation would be like if somebody did that, but also the opponent had a card in hand that made that the right play somehow. So like the 0.1% of the time that's going to be the right play, it is the right play this time. At that point, you got to go like, wait a minute. Did the opponent just make that mistake in a really coincidental spot? Or do they have information they shouldn't have? Am I holding my hand too low and they saw it? Are they cheating? Something like that. So that's where we are to orient us in this poker hand using a Magic analogy, is to say that there's an incorrect play in general because of the hidden information. It was actually the correct play. If all the information was to be exposed, this would be the correct play. So super interesting. All of a sudden, immediately, everyone's scrutinizing this hand. Now, something else happens also. As people are debating with relatively little information, there's an entire debate about the dynamics of what's going to happen to the money. So what happens in the game is Garrett he loses the hand, but he's very suspicious as to why. Like, how can anyone ever call him with Jack High? He really didn't expect it. Nobody would expect it. Starts to sort of ask questions. She starts to say things about the hand, like she says, "I'll beat you off stream too," even before anyone alleged cheating. So that's a little bit interesting, fishy. Her story's not very consistent. Maybe at one point she indicates she maybe thought she had a 3, which is one possible mistake she could have made. Another point, she sort of does things that indicate she didn't think she had a 3. She checks her cards at one point in the hand, so that makes it a little bit less likely she thought she had a 3. But it's all this information comes out that makes it very unclear as to, now it's relatively clear that she wasn't telling a consistent story, but there's all kinds of reasons people might not tell a consistent story. If you ask a player, why the heck did you bolt my creature when I was at 3? I mean, maybe they'll say, yeah, I thought it was the best play because you could have had this hexproof card, but they might also say, look, I made a mistake, or, I didn't notice you at 3, or my life pad said 4. They might give you 2 different versions of that because they might want to be like, there's a protection of your ego that happens where you try to explain something away or you don't remember, or hey, the whole reason you made the mistake in the first place is because your blood sugar's low and you're in that mode. I mean, there's a million reasons why that can happen. Again, I've seen that too in poker and in Magic, where somebody can't really explain why they did something, and they tell 2 stories about what happened. I've seen it with people cheating in Magic. I've seen it with people aren't cheating in Magic. So that's another common fact pattern. There's all kinds of explanations and narratives that are consistent, both with a cheating explanation of what happened and with a no cheating, it was a mistake explanation of what happened. And again, that's common in Magic too. Somebody might make a play that doesn't really make sense, and or they might even, like, for example, they might not put their creature in the graveyard, even though their creature only has 4 toughness and it took 4 damage in combat. And there's obviously 2 explanations for that. They knew that it was supposed to die and they were trying to get one over on their opponent. That's called cheating. Or they didn't know that it was dead. They thought it had 5 toughness, or they thought it only took 3 damage. And again, there's a bunch of narratives, and I've been in this situation a million times where I'm trying to explain to the judge why there are indicators that this is cheating. I had one where my opponent picked up their pen to write down their Eidolon trigger, loss of 2 life, looked at me, and then when I didn't indicate that it's not my trigger, so when I didn't indicate I was putting on the stack, they put their pen down. I was trying to explain to the judge that the fact that they pick their pen up and looked at me and put it down is evidence that they were cheating, that they knew they should have taken 2 damage, but they didn't. The judge said, well, I can't tell if it's a mistake. Even though you told me that, I didn't see it. I can't tell whether it's a mistake, honest, or a mistake cheating, or not a mistake but cheating. So the judge in that case just issued a warning instead of something more severe like you would see for cheating. So this happens in Magic all the time. It certainly happens in poker too, where you don't really know what happened. But the fact that it's on a live stream using a technology that we know can be the basis of cheating means that there's all this suspicion. So even if, I sort of had, with all the information I'm describing to you, including Garrett coming out and saying, I thought I was cheated, Robbie then gives the money back, which is another thing I should mention. They go into a side session, into a discussion outside with one of the people who runs the casino stream, Garrett and Robbie. Garrett expresses that, hey, this is about to go viral. He either suggests or doesn't suggest, depending on whose account you believe, about giving the money back. That would make it right, or at least help. Robbie gives the money back. So Robbie gives the money back, and just, did she give the money back because she sort of understood why it looked fishy and wanted to look better and was sort of covering tracks? Did she give the money back because the money doesn't mean anything to her, that much to her, and that's why and she's playing for fun anyways, and that's the whole reason why she's in the game? Okay, so with all that information, and plus there was some whispers that she's being financially backed by someone else in the game, which is a little bit inconsistent with her being financially independent, and a little bit consistent with her just giving money back. That's sort of inconsistent with that. On that information alone, I thought it was about 60% likely that she cheated, 40% likely that she didn't, based on how strange the hand was, the stakes at which it's happening, the indicators from the people involved in terms of what they were saying, how they're explaining it, but then also the fact that these streams, if you're going to cheat like this, the technology actually, it's not like we don't know how it could happen. We know how it could happen. We don't know whether it happened. We know how it could happen, and we know this hand is just so strange. The most plausible explanation, by a little bit, by a small margin, the most plausible explanation to me was that she was getting information that indicated best hand or not best hand, such as, something will buzz if you have the best hand. And then she probably just said, okay, I'm facing a call. I know I have the best hand. I'll just make the call. And that all the other reasons why you wouldn't do that, because it would raise so much suspicion, well, maybe that didn't spring to the front of her mind and she made the call. That seemed more likely than the other scenario, but not by that much, 60-40. Now we know a little bit more. There's a little bit more evidence that she was sort of put in this game, or there was a financial backing, so there wasn't her money on the table, which makes me more suspicious. Why would you even think it's proper to give that money back, right? Is it really the case that you're in this game just messing around, don't care about the money? If it's somebody else's money in part, that makes it a little bit harder to believe. And then the bombshell came out yesterday, an update to the story where not just is it my perception, your perception, but there's something else really, really weird happened. An employee of the Hustler Casino live stream, specifically an employee who has worked on the audio-visual components of the stream, setting up microphones for the players, that sort of thing at a minimum, maybe more, was caught on camera by the casino taking $15,000 in chips off of Robbie's stack after the stream ended, on this day. So of all the coincidences happening that you have to sort of explain away if you're a nothing to see here believer, even with a probabilistic weight of over 50%, even if you're 52%, nothing happened here that was inappropriate. Well, now you have to explain another coincidence that a casino employee before this, before the dust had settled on this day of poker, took $15,000 in chips off of this player. So now everyone immediately goes, well, not only is that something else that's really interesting, but it's another coincidence. Like that could easily be the person who was supplying information to Robbie. Does it mean conclusively that's what was going on? Of course not. we know what we know. We know that this event happened, that event happened. It's either a really, really another coincidence on the pile of coincidences and things that look off, or it's some evidence that what's going on here is a conspiracy to defraud other players in the game, a conspiracy that involved the player who played a hand very, very strangely and the staff member who was caught stealing thousands of dollars. And was the person paying themselves back or not? Well, who knows? Again, all we can do is speculate. But it's a really big coincidence. So now from 60-40 likely, I move into something closer to like an 80-20 or an 85-15 in terms of percentages. I still have to allow for the possibility that this is on the up and up and it was a bad coincidence because, again, I've seen stranger things in my life and in gaming, and sometimes these coincidences do happen. Maybe this guy was stealing, maybe this guy was doing this all the time, but he got caught this time because of the camera scrutiny. So there's sort of another explanation for how this could happen and look like a coincidence because there was a higher level of scrutiny driven by her actions if they were innocent, and then he might have consistently been sort of skimming things. So there's there's always a way to explain it away. I don't want to ever go to 0% or 2%. Like I've heard players at any point, if you were at 2% on either side at any point here, you're probably too confident and you probably don't understand how to reason through complicated situations probabilistically. So if you're thinking about analogies to Magic and cheating that's happened in Magic, I want to first of all think about two different types of situations that come up. One of them is sort of a repeated lifetime achievement award, lifetime body of work type of, I think this person's a cheater and now I'm getting increasingly confident. That would be like an Alex Bertoncini or a Tomohiro Saito where there are some things that look off and there's some moments where you go like, okay, in isolation, if this is someone I've never met, I don't know. Maybe I think it's 25% likely they're cheating, or maybe it's stalling. Maybe I think it's only 5% likely. But if that happens 100 times, you'd be a fool not to change your estimation. If that happens 5 times, it's different than 1 time. 10 times is different than 5. So there's sort of a body of work, and over time, the evidence sort of piles up that way. That would be like, again, take like a Tomohiro Saito with stalling, or an Alex Bertoncini, although a little bit of both. Now, and Alex Bertoncini did things like play an extra land, right? Okay. So you say, well, Alex Bertoncini played extra land, but he's not the only. There's a million players who've done that on stream. But if somebody that doesn't have that reputation, right? So if like a Sam Black like plays an extra land, you go like, I'm almost certain that he just sort of made that mistake because we've all made that mistake at one point, and there's not like a whole body of evidence of other stuff happening. Whereas with Alex Bertoncini, you go, no, he doesn't get that benefit of the doubt. There's a body of work here. This is different. What's happening with Robbie, and with Mike Postle, the other guy who cheated in poker, it was more like that. Although, at the end of the day, when you scrutinize it, ended up being both. It was a bunch of incidents that were really unexplainable on their own in isolation, and there was 100 of them. So he was like, that's why I say we're all pretty confident what happened there, because it was both. With Robbie, there's no body of work. She hasn't done this 100 times. We haven't located 5 other hands where you can't really explain it through other than a really wild mistake or cheating. This is more like the Yuya Watanabe situation, where he was thought to be a clean player, but one day he's caught with evidence that's so hard to explain any other way that people become very confident that he cheated, right? And with Yuya Watanabe, you should be above 90% because of the strength of the evidence. So you have to think about the two different ways of getting confidence is the strength of the evidence related to one incident or the sort of repeated weight of multiple incidents. With Yuya, the sleeves were marked in a way that you can never get to 0. You can't say that they couldn't have been marked by somebody else and he didn't know, or the judge hated Yuya Watanabe and framed him or something. But those are just so much less likely than he cheated that, okay, we sort of know what happened because of the strength of the evidence in that one case. That's where we are with Robbie, where, yeah, it's a little bit of accumulation of this and that, but it's only one incident. So it's really about how difficult is it? How many leaps of faith do I have to make to believe that something innocent happened here? And the evidence that came out yesterday, and by the way, she followed that employee on Twitter. She claims that employee on Twitter is just somebody who she followed not thinking about it because there were mutuals on the high stake following the hustler casino or vice versa. So she has an explanation for that, but it's certainly not fully satisfactory. So you have to sort of think about this. Now for me, this is closer to a Yuya type of situation than the guy who bolted my 2 creatures 2 weeks ago. even though that was an unexplainable play. That's just someone making a mistake is what happened there, because there's no reason to do that. Here, I think we have a situation that's really hard to explain, other than cheating becomes just the easiest explanation, the most likely explanation by far for why there's now a staff member who's been terminated off the stream, who was doing things that they shouldn't do with the access he had. Well, that obviously makes it more likely he was doing other things he shouldn't have been doing with the access he had. And he was involved with this player's stack. Well, that's a little bit of evidence that he was involved in this player's stack and had some vested interest in some other way. So I think that's where we are with this now. It's not something where we may ever know 100% what happened, although given that someone has now been sort of singled out as at least wrong, this person's been fired, and there's now a bounty of over $200,000. If that person wants to be a whistleblower and say, all right, here's the text between me and Robbie, here's what happened. If that's what happened, and this person, there's some chance now, it's much greater chance now than it was 2 days ago, that this is going to be resolved in a way where people start admitting and outing co-conspirators. In a conspiracy, there's always that dynamic of, if this was a conspiracy, who's going to be the first one to reveal it? And there's actually a bounty to try to incentivize somebody to do that. And there's also the fact that somebody just lost their job and their reputation and sort of is in sort of a nothing to lose type of situation. Now, that person came out today and actually sent some text that they're sticking to their story. They stole the chips, but they weren't involved in any cheating, and it's nothing to do with Robbie. In fact, Robbie, by not pressing charges, was doing something nice. Now, of course, the people who believe Robbie did something inappropriate in the hand are thinking that charges weren't pressed because these are co-conspirators and she doesn't want to do that. So anyways, always there's competing narratives, just like in Magic. Like I said, there's the person who forgets their Eidolon trigger, all of a sudden you have competing narratives. They didn't notice the Eidolon trigger, or they noticed it, but they tried to gain 2 life when they shouldn't have. One's cheating, one's innocent. You have to look at the totality of the circumstances. You have to weigh all the evidence, and evidence doesn't mean proof. Evidence just means something that makes a fact that makes a conclusion more likely or less likely. So there you have it. Robbie, for those just joining, is a recreational player. She, again, made a play that can't really be explained through the logic of good poker play, solid poker play, or even ordinary usual poker play. It's a really extreme line she took. Like I said at the outset, for those of you who are just joining, those types of plays happen. I've seen, like I said, 2 weeks ago, somebody lightning bolted my creature while I was at 3 life. They're not going to be able to tell you why that was the right move strategically. All they can say is, I made a mistake, mistakes happen. That's sort of where Robbie's at. She's saying, I can't necessarily prove to you that this is the best way to play poker, but I made a mistake. It turned out to not be a mistake because Garrett's hand was so weak, but that's just sort of happenstance. I did think that he was weak. That's why I made the call. I happen to be right about that. And even if the fundamentals say I shouldn't be able to call here, well, I don't play with fundamentals in a way that makes that consistent hand-to-hand where you can rely on that. And again, I know that's true for some players in Magic and for some players in poker. Now, at these stakes, when each player is risking $135,000, we have to ask also, well, what's the likelihood that someone's just showing up and playing their sort of kitchen table style of poker for these stakes? And it's going to depend on the player profile. If it's somebody who's so rich that they don't care about $130,000, yeah, not only can you see it, I've seen it. I've seen people give away $10,000 at a casino. Well, there's certainly no game theory optimal poker algorithm that says you should give away $10,000, but I've seen it. So we have to keep that in mind, that sometimes behavior that can't be explained through the logic of the game, it makes sense through the logic outside the game of someone's personal situation, of how they think about money, of whether they care about having fun and the perception more than the money. That's all certainly possible. But we also have some evidence that this player was receiving financial backing, had some kind of financial relationship with another player in the game, indicators that maybe this isn't someone who's so wealthy that the money on the table doesn't mean anything to them. So we have to sort of, again, think about the weight of that evidence, the likelihood that it's true, and the impact that it has on our viewpoint of other evidence and of the conclusions that some are trying to draw. Either I'm 60% confident she cheated 2 days ago, but today I'm 80%, or maybe 2 days ago you were 13% confident they were cheating, like Justin Bonomo tweeted. He was 13% confident that something was going on 2 days ago, and today he sits here at something like, I don't know if he said 63 or 83%, whatever. He's moved in a really, mountainous way in terms of from the probably wasn't cheating to the probably cheating side. So you want to have these probabilities in your mind be fluid. Don't jump to a conclusion and stick to it. And that logic, that methodology is going to serve you well in Magic too. What you don't want to do when you hear about an accusation of cheating in Magic is jump to the first conclusion that seems to your intuition to fit the facts, and then all of a sudden interpret everything else you hear and see to be in line with that in what we would call confirmation bias, in a confirmation biased method, where you're sort of fitting everything. Because again, I know that once you pick a narrative, you can fit everything to it, just like in this case. So you're gonna come across this, if you play tournament Magic, you're gonna have somebody who says, I just made a mistake. And it's going to be up to the judge and to you in terms of how you feel about it, and whether you want to tell others and sort of harm the person's reputation. And what do you tell others? If you play Magic long enough in the tournament setting, you'll be put in that spot. I've been there many times. I've caught cheaters. I've had suspicions where I don't know if the person cheated or not, and I've had to make a decision about what to tell the judge and what to tell my friends in terms of what to look out for or whatever. And I've landed in different places based on the evidence. But you have to be a little bit cautious about your first impression. You don't want to disregard your intuition. You don't want to discard the gut feeling you have about what looks right and what looks wrong. But you also don't want to anchor to it so strongly that you can't fairly interpret new evidence. So that's been the challenge in front of the poker community at large this last week. And that's going to be the challenge in front of the Magic community anytime there is a drama or a debate involving cheating. Okay, let me check the chat and let me see what's going on. Okay, since you must maintain 20% not cheating, what's the 20% explanation of the AV guy skimming off her stack? Seems like more to 5 than 10%. Okay, so there's a good chance to talk about something about sort of thinking probabilistically and thinking about these scenarios. First of all, the whole what's your story for why? Well, first of all, you have to remember that sometimes thinking only in narratives will actually take you away from, it'll make your estimations worse. Because why is that? Because sometimes the ease with which a scenario pops into your mind does not correspond to the likelihood of that scenario in real life. So for example, when an opponent, let's say somebody does something wild and I can't think of an explanation for why they would ever do that. Does that correspond to a 0% likelihood that there is a reason why they did it? No, because there is an entire possibility space of reasons and ways things went down and reasons things went down the way they did that I just can't think of or don't think of or whatever. So you have to also have in your possibility space that you're trying, and that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about I'm 80% confident, 20% confident in this and that, we're saying that there's this in the diagram of if you draw circles and each circle is the events that could have happened, and you sort of shrink one and enlarge the other to correspond to probability. You say, well, there's more different things that could have happened here, or there's more likely. It's actually about likelihood, not number. What you don't want to do is use the number of scenarios you can think of or how quickly you could think of them as a proxy for what's going on, because there may simply be things that you can't think of. And oftentimes it's easier to think of certain types of narratives than it is to think of others. It's easier to imagine why she wouldn't have cheated than to imagine exactly how she did down to the last detail. That doesn't mean that's more likely, so be careful with that. Okay. Some people are better articulating a thought process than others. Yeah, so we don't want to over-anchor to the fact that you couldn't explain yourself, because again, I'm here to tell you, I've seen Magic players be unable to explain plays they made. I've seen them change their story 3 times. I've seen poker players do the same. I've spent plenty of time playing both games. Really enjoying this. Glad to hear it. How big are the stakes involved? I think the stakes matter in a number of ways, but again, just like every other piece of evidence, you can't anchor onto something so strongly to think this is the proof. Yeah, it's less likely to play a hand in a really unusual way that's going to lose money over time. It's less likely to see a strategy like that in a high game. But actually, let's think about it a slightly different way though. In a really, really high stakes game that's televised on a stream, or it's streamed, I don't know if you consider that televised, but it's streamed, the stakes are high, the personalities are big, and people maybe are just looking at, those games also attract what we would call whales. Whales are players who care more about having fun than they do about the money they win or lose. It also is an attraction to those players. So to the extent you believe, Robbie, that she is that player profile, it's consistent with that. So it's less likely that you're going to see a bad play for, and you're going to see it's less likely someone would give back 6 figures than 3 figures. I'm more likely to throw somebody a $500 chip if there's a dispute than I am to ship back a, $130,000 of winnings. So anyways, all this stuff matters, but none of it makes up the, no one fact here is where it determines the size of these probability lumps, right? If you say that I'm 80% sure something's cheated and someone cheated, and I'm 20% sure that they didn't cheat. Well, what does that mean? It just means that I'm looking at all the evidence, and there's not really one fact here that's driving 70 of that 80%. That's not really how it works. Sometimes you have a soul read. This dude's full of shit. Yeah, certainly possible to have a soul read, but most players understand that just thinking somebody is weak doesn't mean you can call them. And that's not such an, now, it's neither such an obvious concept that somebody couldn't mess it up. They could mess it up. It's also not such a complicated concept that amateur players wouldn't recognize that even though I think someone's full of shit, they went all in first before I did, I got to give this one up. Even recreational players can understand the logic of that. If I only have jack high, I'm not even beating queen high draws, king high draws, ace high draws. Well, I don't have enough here to make a stand. Okay. What else do we have in the comments? Good friend of mine is a court judge, says people overestimate how consistent even genuine statements are. Yeah, certainly as a lawyer, I understand and I'm happy to echo that sentiment, that the coherence with which someone is able to recreate events, and the failures could be failures of memory, or it could be driven by a desire to to sort of fill in gaps. These are common human behaviors that make testimony about what happened unreliable, right? And an inconsistency doesn't necessarily mean someone's lying, and a consistent story doesn't necessarily mean someone's telling the truth. So that's certainly true. Okay, I'm just scanning the comments to see what else you guys want to know about sort of magic comparisons. Again, if you're just joining, I'm likening this scenario now with what we know now. It's more like the Yuya situation and less like a Tamahara Saito situation where, well, it's sort of unclear. Yeah, okay, we sort of suspect that the person's intentionally stalling, but it's not that. Well, the evidence is starting to get a little bit more extreme now. Given that now the number of coincidences you have to believe in to explain it away in an innocent way has just gone way up as of the news yesterday. That there was a player involved in illegal activity, whether it was this or not, we don't yet know, but certainly illegal activity has been proven and admitted. What other questions do you guys have? Did Garrett specify how she ever cheated, or was it just, so yeah, Garrett, to his credit, understood that he needs to articulate what he thinks, what he knows, what he believes, but to not go so far as to sort of start speculating as to it. Now, he was in some part speculating to say, I strongly believe I was cheated, but he didn't say here's exactly how it happened, because he doesn't have access to that. And you don't necessarily, like, if you see a pedestrian lying dead in the road with tire tracks on them, but you can't tell the cops, what the color of the car was that hit the person. It doesn't mean you should make up a color of the car. It doesn't mean that the cops shouldn't believe you, because you don't have access. You can still strongly believe this person was struck by a vehicle and not have all the information about exactly how it happened. So that was the situation Garrett was in. Some people thought he went a little bit too far and too strong, but he's allowed to have the impression and the confidence level that he has, and he's allowed to express that, and he did that. Now, as more information has come to light, he looks better and better. Quickly before I hop off, there's one other thing that happened here where people started saying that this dynamic was being driven by sexism in part. Now, when the mainstream picked it up, that became a really popular narrative. This man just couldn't take losing, and this woman happened to make a great play, and he just can't. And people, it blew their minds. That's not really what's happening here. I mean, there's certainly perceptions and reactions and levels of charity versus animosity that are potentially driven by sexism and the dynamics of how poker works and how online discourse works. And so certainly, who the people are and how they look and stereotypes are always going to be a factor in how things play out. But that's not what's driving here. And those mainstream reports that try to, like, those mainstream feminism accounts that tend to have that knee-jerk reaction. I mean, I personally, I'm of the opinion that even though, feminism is a good thing, those knee-jerk reactions are actually don't serve feminism or these dialogues. And certainly in this case, like that knee-jerk reaction doesn't serve anybody to say that, well, all this is a man who can't take. I mean, that's just way off, and these people don't understand poker. So I'm trying to provide you a different perspective, one that understands poker and other games like Magic and cheating, and also says, look, we also can't pretend like the reaction that Robbie got and the sentiments that people were expressing and the beliefs that they have because, she's showing cleavage on. We can't pretend that that has no influence over people and that people's reactions are always healthy and never toxic. But we also can't allow that to be, something that a blinder that where now we can't talk about what happened or what's likely to have happened because to do so, is piling on in a sexist way or something like that. So there's some nuance there. People went back and forth on Twitter about it and sort of, again, it had the look and feel of a bunch of Twitter discourse where people are all over the map. The trolls end up being retweeted, and that's unfortunate. But most people I actually talked to had a pretty reasonable take on it when you get down to that level. Does her offer to run it twice factor in the situation from a poker strategy, or this is evidence? Okay, so run it twice is just that there was an agreement that the pot would essentially be split in two, and there'd be 2 river cards. I mean, it makes it a little bit less likely that she had access to every card that would be dealt, as opposed to access to the cards as they were known. Doesn't really mean much other than that. What are your thoughts on Rip staking her for way more than he actually bought in for? Isn't that weird given her experience? Yeah, I think that is a fact that's inconsistent with some of the narratives, some of the innocence evidence, or some of the things that we sort of have to believe that this was innocent. I mean, because I think one of the things you have to believe if this was innocent in terms of you have to sort of believe this is a very recreational player who someone else has offered money to because we have to have, I don't really know why. Let me reframe that. I think the difficult part about that is understanding why would you stake what's ostensibly the worst player in the game. The worst player because it's not an experienced high stakes player, and now we see that the strategy fundamentals weren't really there. Why would you stake that player? Now again, people might just simply have more money than they know what to do with, and maybe Rip, who I think is associated with Jake Paul or something, maybe this guy just wanted to play with her, and sometimes you stake somebody in a game because you want them to come out. And she was like, no, I'll just stay home. And he's like, come on, I'll put you in the game. Come on, whatever. So again, there is definitely a potentially innocent explanation, but it doesn't ring to me as a fact that makes it more likely that what's happening is that she's just a whale playing her own money, doesn't care about that money, and therefore can do whatever she wants with it in the hand and can give it back after the hand. It doesn't sort of look that way. Okay. It could be the 2 amateur know how to cheat angle was a smoke screen. Yeah, I mean, again, like in all the scenarios, in every possible scenario here, she didn't fully comprehend what the Jack-4 call implies. If she was playing the hand straight up, she didn't quite understand how weak that holding is against Garrett's possible range of holdings. If she's cheating, she didn't quite understand the perception that would result from calling with that hand. So again, like the fact that like there's some kind of error happening here with the strength of J4O in this spot is consistent with both narratives. I think it's a little bit more consistent with the cheating narrative, since again I think even recreational players are extremely unlikely to make this play. And even if you're fucking around and you're not playing for money that you're not playing with the rent money, still when you look down and see you have nothing and you've played poker, she certainly played at other streams and her play looks relatively normal. Just not many players are going to make that call. Okay. Do you understand what Efro is saying about 3 high? Okay, I don't know. 3 heart, 6 clubs. Yeah, there's also like there are certain potential explanations about the RFID reading gone wrong. I don't put a ton of stock in those. We don't know exactly what the cheating method is if there was cheating. So it could have simply been the players being notified their hand is good and is just acting on that information, or it could be the person with the information believes for a mistake in the technology, in the cheat, that the hand is stronger than it is. We just don't know. She did know, and she was acting like she didn't. Yeah, and the other thing is, poker is about deception. So there's all kinds of ways in which her performance after could simply be about sort of protecting her image at the table, and sort of she doesn't want people to be suspicious of her because that's not fun, and she wants to have an explanation, but then she made a bad play. She just doesn't want to come out and say I made this horrible play. So yeah, the brain starts to sort of scramble a little bit. So if she wasn't cheating, there's still plenty of reasons why her story would be a little inconsistent. Yeah, we talked about how the recent development that someone stole money makes it, again, that's something that you also have to explain as a coincidence if you believe she didn't cheat, and it becomes increasingly difficult. Although I did offer something I hadn't seen a lot of people talk about, that the fact that there was increased scrutiny on this camera video feed on this game is something to keep in mind, that he may have been skimming off of stacks twice a week for the last 6 weeks or for the last year, and there just wasn't the right level of scrutiny to catch the guy. So that is a possible innocent. That's why, again, I've got 20%, 15 to 20% likelihood that she didn't cheat, even with all we know, because it is possible to explain that. That, like, look, this guy skims, and unfortunately, some people aren't honest. And he's worked on the stream for a while, and maybe oftentimes when you get your hand caught in the cookie jar, it's not the first time your hand went in that cookie jar, but now there's all this extra scrutiny on the cookie jar to sort of stretch that analogy to its limit, and now he gets caught. Well, that is one way that this could be not a coincidence, where there's sort of it's called third cause explanation. There's this third thing that's causing both. The mistake she made caused both an extra level of scrutiny on the event and this person to get caught, but they're not connected in a direct way. They're connected because of this other third cause. So you got to keep that in mind, and that's how you want to reason through these scenarios, not necessarily thinking of narratives, but thinking about how, like, I don't want to get so overconfident in one story that my failure of imagination makes me overconfident. Do we know where they checked older tapes? Yeah, I don't know if older tapes have been checked for that cheating, so that may be, their investigation's ongoing. That may be something that they're looking at today or tomorrow. Efro saying, well, it's still a big coincidence. I agree. It's still going to be a big coincidence under any scenario. Why would they cheat if they're not play for that much money? I don't understand that one. I'm going to go get some cookies after my cookie jar analogy. Awesome. Do high-stakes players not count their chips after the game? Most do, some don't. The whale who gives away 130K without thinking twice is also the person who just trusts people, doesn't count the chips, and doesn't care. Again, like I've played with, you might think that's insane. I've played with players who have given away $10,000 at the table because they felt bad, because somebody asked for it as a tip. Maybe I haven't seen 10K as a tip, but I've seen a number that you wouldn't tip, and I've seen a number that I wouldn't tip. So we can't project our own preferences and utility models onto other people in a scenario. We have to keep in mind that we don't know their preferences. We don't know how their utility function works. And being like, hey, don't count my money because I don't care, that's a part of some people's personality. Give the money back because I don't care. That's a part of people's personality, and I've seen it. Even if it's not your personality, it doesn't mean it's not somebody else's. So again, we have to reserve some percentage likelihood here that everything's on the up and up. Even if we think now that it's somewhat overwhelmingly likely that there was cheating, we have to reserve a real probability in our space for this is on the up and up. All right, I gotta hop. I gotta run. Hopefully this was useful to sort of put this in the context of Magic and cheating and how we think about catching cheaters in Magic and telling what's a mistake versus what's not a mistake in Magic, and then applying that logic to what we know about this situation. Check out Joe Ingram's streams if you want to go a really deep dive and watch 50 hours of coverage of this. Check out Doug Polk's summaries if you want one take on it. So, this is ongoing. There's going to be another development later today, I'm sure. There's going to be another one tomorrow. At this point, things are kind of developing pretty rapidly. So I might hop back on and explain new developments, but hope this was helpful to folks. Take care, everybody.